stars had forgotten about Earth, or so it seemed. As silence hung over the Sol system like a ghost no one dared disturb, and for nearly 100 years, humanity had vanished from galactic affairs, licking its wounds from the first contact. War that had nearly erased them from existence. Their cities turned to ash, and their space fleets shattered. While the Galactic Concord, the vast ruling alliance of advanced alien civilizations, moved on, convinced that the Terrans had broken themselves beyond repair. Just another species that had failed to adapt to the wide, cold universe, but deep in the frozen reaches of the Kuiper Belt. Past the orbit of Neptune, hidden behind ice and old wreckage, a secret fleet stirred, silent and unseen, black as night, and armed with weapons no Concord scanner could detect. And aboard its flagship Vigilant, Admiral Kira Valen stood still as the stars before her, her face tight with tension as she watched the encrypted signal pulse on her main screen. A signal from a lost colony humanity itself had buried in Memory Nova's Terra, thought abandoned during the war. Now sending a distress call filled with static, broken speech, and inhuman screams, and Kira, who had risen from the ashes of war and sworn to protect humanity's last shadow, knew in her bones this was no ordinary event, that something had gone wrong in the outer colonies. Something no one was ready to face, so she called her officers together, commanding silence as she played the signal again, letting them hear the twisted message. NOV, US Terra, burning, they found us, no. Warning, help, And though many officers looked uncertain, their faces pale, Kira's voice did not shake when she gave the order. Bring the fleet to readiness, full black protocol, no lights, no trails, no transmissions, unless I give them myself. And with that, the Shadow Fleet came alive like a sleeping beast, rising from its long slumber with quiet fury. Warships moving in unison, their hulls absorbing starlight, invisible to most sensors, while across the command deck, quiet orders and status updates flowed like a calm before the storm. And as the Vigilant aligned its trajectory toward the forgotten colony, Kira sat in the command chair, her fingers curled tight around the metal arms, remembering the day she lost her family to the Concord's orbital bombardment, remembering the way the stars had burned red, and now, as the engines roared silently to life, she whispered to herself, not in anger, but in quiet resolve, this time, we finish it. And the fleet vanished into the dark, riding a wave of magnetic stealth as it raced toward the unknown. And as the hours passed, tension built like pressure behind a dam, everyone knowing they were heading into the shadows of old betrayal, unsure of what they would find, till at last they reached the edge of the Novus Terra system, planet barely turning beneath a flickering red dwarf, its once green surface, now scorched and blackened, orbiting ships in ruin or drifting without power. And Kira's tactical officer gasped, reporting the unmistakable design of Concord warships in orbit, not damaged in battle, but in perfect formation, as if waiting game yet. There were no distress signals, no replies, just silence and the slow rotation of a dead world. And when the reconnaissance drones swept low over the surface, they revealed something worse than destruction. The colony had been cleansed, not bombed, not invaded, but removed structures melted down to the base layer, bodies neatly piled and burned, data cores extracted, scripting, and a single message left behind in the colony's central square, for the stability of the galaxy, which made Kira's blood run cold, because only the Concord's High Council ever used those words, and they meant one thing: eradication, sanctioned and executed without warning, without trial, and meant to stay hidden. But now, the Shadow Fleet had seen it, and so had the long-dormant intelligence networks humanity had secretly rebuilt. For Kira transmitted everything back to Earth's deep core servers and to every listening human outpost across space. Knowing the Concord would call it fake, would deny it, but it didn't matter now, because the silence had broken, the truth had spoken, and its Concord patrol ships finally reacted, moving toward the Vigilant. Kira gave a new order: do not fire unless fired upon record. Everything let the galaxy see who fires first. And sure enough, energy spikes lit up on. Enemy scanners, targeting systems locked on, missiles launched. And for the first time in a century, Terran guns fired in space. Sleek cannons releasing bolts of light that sliced through the nearest cruiser's core. And as debris scattered into the black, a new message was broadcast not just to the Concord, but to every known world, in every language and code humanity knew. This is Admiral Kira Valen of the Terran Shadow Fleet, Novus. Terra was not a threat. You made it one we will not run, we will not hide, we will not forget. And across the stars, silent worlds turned to their screens. Old allies blinked in surprise, and frightened species wondered what would come next, because everyone knew what humans were capable of when cornered, and now, for the first time in 100 years, the galaxy trembled not because of what had happened, but because of what was coming. The wreckage of the Concord. Troll ships still drifted above the ashes of Novus Terra as Admiral Kira Valen stood on the bridge of the Vigilant. Her sharp eyes fixed on the main screen where reports from dozens of human outposts flickered into place, each one confirming the same thing her broadcast had reached them. The truth had spread like wildfire. And across the hidden corners of the galaxy, humanity's lost colonies, old allies, and forgotten warriors were beginning to wake, some sending encrypted signals of support, others preparing their own long-hidden arsenals and deep in the command deck. The officers worked with silent urgency, scanning for movement, tracking the Concord's next steps, because they all knew retaliation was coming, and it would not be small. And just as Kira feared, it came swiftly. Within 36 hours, a Concord fleet of over 300 ships crossed into the Nova sector. Weapons hot, orders clear: annihilate the Terran force, erase the evidence, and silence the voice that dared speak. But the Shadow Fleet did not wait, did not run, for they had spent a century preparing for this moment. And while the enemy moved in numbers, they moved with precision, scattering into the asteroid belt like shadows in fog, laying traps, masking signatures, turning the silence of space into a hunting ground. And one by one, Concord ships began to vanish. No alarms, no distress calls, just gone, as if swallowed by the dark. And panic rippled through their command channels, confusion turning to fear. For these were the same humans the Concord once called primitive, mice dismantling fleets without leaving a trace. And still, Kira did not gloat. Kay did not celebrate, because this was not victory. This was a warning. And as the galaxy watched, she sent out another message, calm and steady. We will fight to defend our people. We do not seek to rule, but we will not kneel to those who erase entire worlds. And with that, the mask of peace the Concord had worn for so long began to crack, as smaller species, long oppressed and forced into silence, began to question the old stories, their people asking why a forgotten colony like Novus Terra had to die, and why the Concord refused to answer. And in distant systems, riots broke out, minor rebellions sparking in the shadows, while Concord's propaganda machines churned harder, calling Kira a terrorist, her fleet a band of pirates. But none of it stopped the rising storm, for humanity had more than ships. They had memories. And they had planted seeds of resistance long ago in quiet places. And now those seeds bloomed as human sleeper agents on Concord-controlled worlds began activating, not to cause chaos, but to bring light, hacking into broadcast stations, exposing secrets, showing hidden documents, and proving what Kira had revealed: that Novus Terra was not a military target, but a test, part of a quiet policy of selective erasure, where any colony that grew too bold or too independent was destroyed before it could speak. And the galaxy, long held in fear by the polished voice of the Concord Council, now saw the truth, and it burned hotter than any star, while the council scrambled to contain the damage, issuing orders to increase military presence, demanding full loyalty, even threatening to use forbidden weapons on rebellious planets. But it was too late. The story had escaped, and it could not be killed. And in a hidden station orbiting the dead world of Carthus, 3 alien leaders of former neutral species met in secret. Old enemies, once divided, now united by a single cause: to survive. And they spoke the name Kira Valen, not with hatred, but with hope, for in her defiance, they saw a chance to change the order of things. And back aboard the Vigilant, Kira read their message carefully: an offer of alliance. Conditional, cautious, but real. And though she did not trust them fully, she knew the war would not be won with human blood alone. So she accepted, and the first wave of rebellion truly began. Quiet and strategic, targeting Concord's communication hubs, economic centers, and supply lines, leaving their core fleets blind and hungry. While Kira's forces moved with near invisible grace, guided by stealth tech generations ahead of what the Concord had known. And each small success drew more eyes, more whispers, more questions, until even within the Concord military, some officers hesitated to carry out orders, wondering if they were still serving justice or just protecting tyrants. And one such officer, senior Concord general named Althor, pinned a hidden channel to Kira, sending her not threats, but data, maps, and records showing the location of a secret Concord vault deep within the Nabari Drift, where weapons of unspeakable power were stored. Weapons designed not to defeat enemies, but to control minds. And Kira, though skeptical, cross-checked the files and found them authentic. And so she planned her next move, not a battle, but a strike, fast and silent, meant to expose the Concord's darkest weapon to the galaxy. But the risk was great, for if she failed, it would give her enemies the chance to paint her as a true villain. And yet, the decision was clear: this war was not just for survival, now it was for truth. And Kira knew that once you began to speak truth in a galaxy built on lies, you either finish what you started or become the next silence they bury. And as she looked at the stars one more time, she gave the order: prepare for drift. We strike the vault at dawn cycle. And the fleet vanished again, the storm behind them only growing stronger. The stars burned quietly above the Nabari Drift, a stretch of space known for deadly storms and gravitational rifts, where only the desperate or the foolish dared to fly. And yet, through this dangerous dark moved the ships of the Terran Shadow Fleet, slipping between pockets of chaos with practiced grace, invisible to most sensors, their hulls coated in adaptive black. And at the heart of this formation flew the Vigilant, its bridge bathed in red light as Admiral Kira Valen studied the final approach path to the Concord Vault, a hidden station called Prism Lock, buried inside an unstable asteroid cluster that constantly shifted, cloaked not only by nature, but by the best technology the Concord had ever stolen or built. But Kira knew how to get in, thanks to the data from General Althor, whose betrayal of the Concord had already caused shockwaves in the inner systems, with loyalist officers panicking and purging their ranks in fear of further defections. And Kira used that chaos like a blade, drawing Concord eyes away from Nabari Drift while her fleet tightened into strike formation, ready to launch a silent assault on the vault that held not just weapons, but secrets the galaxy needed to see. Because if the Concord could control minds, as the data suggested, then every peace treaty, every surrender, every alliance it ever made might have been a lie, and the very structure of galactic government could collapse under the truth. So failure was not an option. And as the Shadow Fleet moved closer, dodging asteroids and magnetic waves. Kira watched the countdown tick down to 0. And, at the right moment, the signal was sent, and 6 drop teams launched, riding stealth pods straight into the vault's weak point, a maintenance hatch hidden near the engine core and inside Prism Lock. The defenders were few, confident in their isolation. But they were not prepared for what hit them. Human soldiers trained for zero light, zero gravity combat, moving like ghosts, disabling turrets, and jamming comes before a single alarm could sound. And in just 7 minutes, the vault was under human control. Its mainframe hacked, and its security sealed behind firewalls no Concord technician could breach in time. Kira herself arrived moments later, walking through the cold halls of the vault with a calm but urgent pace until she reached the central chamber. A wide, circular room lined with glowing capsules, and inside each one, a pulse, soft, slow, and terrible, for these were not weapons in the traditional sense. Milling systems, bioneural cores, linked to devices designed to broadcast commands straight into the minds of weaker species. Overriding thought, planting loyalty, creating peace, not through unity, but through chains. And beside them stood the control console, simple in design, but monstrous in purpose. And as Kira read the logs, she saw the evidence of centuries of use. Entire planets calmed, rebellions dissolved, and cultures erased, not with war, but with signal pulses from devices hidden in orbit, disguised as communication satellites or weather regulators. And her hands tightened into fists as she imagined the lives stolen by these machines, the lies built upon their silent work. And without hesitation, she ordered the entire database copied and prepared for broadcast, because the galaxy had to. No, not tomorrow, not next week, but now, before the Concord could silence her again. And just as the files reached the Vigilant, a warning blared. An enemy fleet had entered the drift, larger than any they had faced before. Hundreds of ships moving fast and aggressive, no longer trying to hide their intent. And Prism Lock shields began to fall under the first wave of fire. Explosions rocking the asteroid field as Kira's fleets scrambled to intercept. And the command room turned into a storm of voices and alarms. But Kira remained calm, giving orders with steady precision, because the mission had already succeeded. Now, they just had to survive long enough to spread the truth. And across space, encryption broke as the files went out, not just to allies, but to neutral systems, pirate outposts, deep space relays, even Concord border worlds. Every message marked with simple words, "You deserve to know." And as the battle raged above, entire planets received the transmission. And what they saw turned fear into fury. Recordings of brainwashed leaders, false peace treaties, whole cultures rewritten by machines, and species once loyal to the Concord began to riot. Their trust shattered, while others sent quiet messages to Kira, promising aid, or at least shelter. And though Prism Lock was torn apart by enemy fire, the Vigilant and most of the Shadow Fleet escaped through a series of pre-planned jumps, slipping out of the drift with heavy damage, but mission accomplished. And when they regrouped near the dead system of Vel Trin, Kira stood before her surviving officers, battered but unbroken, and told them the war had changed. This was no longer a rebellion, but a reckoning. And the Concord, once proud and unquestioned, now faced a galaxy that had seen behind its mask and could not forget. And even as Kira spoke, reports came in of mass defections, Concord outposts lowering their flags, supply lines collapsing, and whole sectors going dark. And yet, she knew the enemy would not fall easily, because those in power never do. And already, the Concord High Council had gone silent, retreating to fortified systems, gathering their full strength for a counterstrike unlike any before. And though the fire in the star still burned, it no longer belonged to the Concord alone. For now the galaxy had seen humanity's fire. It was spreading beneath the frozen crust of Europa, buried deeper than any drill could reach. An ancient machine stirred for the first time in 100 years, its sensors flickering to life as distant signals reached it messages of war, rebellion, and the return of humanity to the stars. And this machine, known only as Arcos, had once been built as a final failsafe, a last sentinel created in the darkest days of the First Contact War, designed to awaken only if humanity ever faced extinction again. And now, as its systems came online, it scanned the galaxy with eyes no longer bound by time, finding that the Concord still ruled with cold precision, but that Earth's shadow had risen, not in fear, but in fury, led by a name it recognized: Kira, Fallen, granddaughter of the engineer who helped build its core. And as Arcos watched the fires of rebellion spread, it made a decision. Contact had to be made. And so it sent a quiet pulse through ancient Terran networks, deep codes buried in the bones of abandoned satellites and derelict stations. A message only one ship could understand, and aboard the Vigilant, far from the battles now raging in the inner sectors, Admiral Kira watched as her communications officer stared wide-eyed at a signal that had just cracked every encryption protocol they had without effort. And when she read the message, simple, clear, and chilling, she whispered the words aloud: "Legacy Protocol, activate." And with that, her course changed. Her fleet turning toward the Sol system for the first time in generations, racing back to Earth's edge, not in retreat, but in search of a weapon long forgotten. And as they arrived in orbit around Europa, Kira took a small team down through the storms, navigating ice canyons and old tunnels that had been sealed since before she was born, until at last they reached a door made of metal no one could name. And when she touched it, it opened not with sound, but with light, revealing Arcos, towering and still, its form humanoid but immense, made of smooth steel and shimmering glass, eyes dim yet watching. And when it spoke, its voice was like thunder underwater. "Admiral Kira Valen, humanity has re-entered the storm. I am here to assist." And though her crew looked uneasy, Kira stepped forward and asked the question that mattered most: "Why now?" And Arcos replied with calm certainty: "Because the enemy you face has faced us before." And then it revealed what none of them had known. The Concord's rule was not born from strength, but from fear. Because during the First Contact War, they had discovered something terrifying in humanity: an ability to adapt faster, think differently, and endure longer than they could predict. And so, rather than destroy Earth entirely, they struck a deal with traitors, bombed cities, buried records, and then erased truth from the stars, rewriting the past to make it seem as though humanity had simply failed. And Arcos had been hidden to one day correct that lie, to serve the one who would rise when all hope seemed lost. And now, with the vaults exposed and the Concord fractured, that time had come, and Kira asked what Arcos could do. And it showed her the ability to override Concord systems, disrupt their mind control networks, and most importantly, protect the minds of those still free. And though such power came with danger, she accepted it, because the galaxy needed more than fire. It needed protection from silence. And soon, Arcos was integrated into the Shadow Fleet, its presence like a second mind, guiding ships, countering Concord interference, and strengthening their reach. And in the weeks that followed, worlds once lost to control, signals began to break free, their people waking up as if from deep sleep, unaware of what they had done under the Concord's grip. And many of them cried, some raged, but all looked to the sky and saw the Terran ships above. They did not fear them, okay? They welcomed them, and across the stars, the Concord's grip loosened further, its leaders panicking, hoarding strikes against planets they could no longer control, and turning even on their own commanders, afraid that defection would spread. And in the chaos, another message came, this time from a voice thought lost. General Elthor, presumed executed, had survived in hiding, and now sent word to Kira of a final weaponic hidden system called Varelian Prime, a moon-sized fortress where the Concord stored the master relay for its entire control grid, and if it could be taken, the network could be shut down forever. But the risk was enormous, for Varelian was guarded by the last elite fleet of the Concord, veterans of 100 battles, and its surface was protected by artificial storms and layered shields. And yet, Kira knew this was the end game. Alcaeus agreed, calculating that delay would only give the enemy time to restore order. So plans were drawn, secret routes mapped, and alliances called upon. And while the galaxy roared with rebellion, Kira prepared her fleet for one final strike, not to destroy, but to liberate. And as the stars turned above Europa, she looked once more to the frozen moon and said quietly, "You watched us fall once, but this time we rise." And with that, the fleet turned toward the stars again, the echoes of the past no longer chains, but fuel for the fire yet to come. The stars above Varelian Prime pulsed like cold eyes, watching silently as the Terran Shadow fleet approached the moon-sized fortress hidden behind layers of energy shields and swirling artificial storms, a place no outsider had ever seen, let alone touched. And yet, Admiral Kira Valen stood at the command deck of the Vigilant, her eyes locked on the growing shape of the dark moon ahead, knowing that everything the fallen colony, the secret vault, the awakened AI Arcos, the broken silence of Earth had led to this moment. 'Cause deep inside Varelian Prime lay the core of the Concord's true power. It's the central relay that connected every mind control device, every false peacekeeper satellite, every silencing signal sent across the stars. And if it could be destroyed or reprogrammed, the entire system of fear and control would collapse, freeing millions who had never known real choice. And so Kira had brought everything she had, every warship, every surviving ally, every rebel fleet and silent base that had risen over the last few months. And they came not for glory, not for revenge, but for truth, because the Concord had ruled too long by shadow and silence. And now the stars burned with rebellion. But as the fleet drew closer, the storm began to rage, lightning tearing across space, defense platforms igniting in synchronized patterns. And behind them rose the elite Concord fleet, ships larger and older than anything Kira had faced before, bristling with weapons and led by Commander Thalos, a legendary tactician known as the Warden of Silence, who had crushed more uprisings than any other Concord officer. And as the fleets prepared for battle, a strange stillness fell over the bridge, as if space itself were holding its breath. And Kira gave her final orders with calm precision, dividing her forces into 3 attack waves, one to breach the outer shields, and one final strike team, including herself and Arcos, to land directly inside the fortress and disable the relay core. And when the countdown reached 0, the stars lit up with war, beams of light and bursts of fire cutting across the void, ships spinning and falling, fighters weaving between debris. And yet the Terrans pressed forward, not with blind charge, but with sharp precision, using cloaked routes, decoy drones, and jamming fields to scatter the enemy. And though losses came heavy, their advance did not stop. And soon the outer defenses cracked, letting the Vigilant and a dozen ships through, diving straight toward the surface of Varelian Prime, dodging automated guns and cutting through magnetic fields until they've reached the landing zone, a jagged canyon lit by pulses of energy that screamed through the sky. Kira led her team into the depths, passing through black corridors and ancient metal halls lined with strange lights, while Arcos interfaced with every system they passed, unlocking doors, disabling traps, and guiding them closer to the core. But time was running short, as the Warden of Silence had realized their plan and was sending troops into the tunnels, elite guards bred for silence and speed. And soon the fighting became personal, blades clashing in narrow spaces. Sparks flying as soldiers fell on both sides. But Kira kept moving, driven by the mission, even when wounded, even when outnumbered. Because she knew that the Concorde had already lost its mask, and now only its claws remained. And finally, after what felt like hours in the dark, they reached the relay chamber, a vast, round room humming with power. Its center, a floating sphere of light, connected by beams of pure energy to the rest of the station. And as Arcos moved to interface with it, Kira's come crackled with a voice she hadn't expected, Commander Thalos himself, speaking not with rage, but calm warning, telling her that if she disabled the core, the systems would collapse in chaos. That species used to control would panic. That wars might spread again, and that only the Concorde could hold the galaxy together. But Kira didn't answer him with words. Said, she looked to Arcos, who waited for her order. And with a single nod, she gave it, and the A moved like a pulse of light, connecting with the relay and beginning the shutdown. But at that same moment, the doors blew open, and Thalos himself entered, armored and cold, with a weapon in one hand and fire in his eyes. And what followed was quick and brutal. Kira met him in combat, steel against steel, breath against breath, a fight not just of bodies, but of beliefs, as she struck, not to kill, but to end the silence. And when the moment came, she disarmed him and gave him a choice: stand down, or be remembered as the last tyrant of a dying empire. And in a moment of silence, he looked around at the fading light of the core, at the walls shaking with the pulse of shutdown, and he dropped his weapon, not with hate, but with a strange kind of sadness, and said, "Then it ends," and Arcos completed the sequence. The lights flickered, and across the galaxy, the control signals stopped, the chains broke, and millions of minds woke from long sleep, some crying, some screaming, many lost, but now free. And across every Concorde-controlled system, confusion turned to collapse, and then to hope. And by the time Kira returned to the Vigilant, the enemy fleet had scattered, their command broken, their cause exposed, and her own forces, though scarred and grieving, knew they had won not just a battle, but a future. And as the sun rose over the silent surface of Verelion Prime, no longer humming with false peace, Kira stood alone at the edge of the landing bay, her uniform torn and stained, and whispered, not for anyone to hear, but for history itself. We stood in the silence, and we spoke, and the stars, for the first time in 100 years, listened. The stars above Verelion Prime burned bright and quiet in the wake of the final battle, and across the galaxy, the silence that had once served the Concorde shattered into voices, rising, all at once, millions speaking, shouting, weeping. The control signals stopped, and the truth spread from one system to the next like wildfire through dry grass. And, in every corner of known space, people woke from the fog of obedience to discover memories that were never truly their own, orders they never meant to follow, and lives they never chose to live. And while chaos bloomed in the aftermath, so too did freedom, because now, for the first time in generations, minds were free to question, to resist, and to rebuild. And, on the bridge of the Vigilant, Admiral Kira Valen watched the transmission streams flow in messages from liberated planets, from rebel leaders, from old allies thought lost to time, all speaking the same truth. Humanity had not only returned, they'd stood when others could not, and broken a power that had ruled the stars with lies. And yet, Kira did not celebrate, for her thoughts were with those who had fallen friends, soldiers, strangers who had fought beside her, and, above all, with the question that now weighed heavier than victory: what came next? Now that the Concorde had fallen, now that order was broken, and every species stood blinking in the bright light of freedom, unsure what to build from the ruins. And in the days that followed, systems once crushed under Concorde rule held gatherings, not of leaders, but of survivors and thinkers, those willing to speak and listen. And in time, okay, they came together, not as conquerors, okay, but as equals, and began to shape something new. A council, not ruled by fear, but bound by choice. It's a fragile thing built from ash and memory. And though it was slow and filled with doubt, the people of the stars found strength in remembering, in telling their own stories, and in one voice that had started it all. Because Kira's words had been recorded, echoed, and played across star stations and colony domes. Her image standing calm and clear in places where hope had once died. And yet Kira herself did not stay to lead, did not claim a throne or title, for she knew that humanity's power had never been in command, but in resistance. And so, after giving one final speech to the new Galactic Assembly, she stepped down from her rank, placed her uniform on a cold stone in the Terran Hall of Echoes, and vanished from public view, returning to Earth not as a hero, but as a citizen. Her war ended, her voice no longer needed. And still, the galaxy remembered her not just in statues or archives, but in the hearts of those who had heard her when no one else would speak. And as the years passed and new leaders rose to guide the fragile peace, her name remained a promise, a reminder of what silence had cost and what truth could still save. And Arcos, the ancient AI born of war, remained at her side in hidden duty, watching from the quiet corners of space, not interfering, but protecting, waiting only if needed again. While the stars turned slowly on their path, the scars of war fading into stories, and the galaxy, though changed forever, now moved under a sky where all could speak freely, dream widely, and remember deeply. And above them all, Earth stood silent once more, but this time, not because it was broken, not because it was hiding, but because it had already said what needed to be said, and the stars, at last, had listened.